Good afternoon, everyone. Welcome to Madrid. Some of you have just arrived. Some of you were locked out. For some of you, it's day 3 of 4. It's hot out there and it's cool in here. And this is the end of your 3rd day, so that's probably a good thing to hear. I think it's great to have so many of you here in the room, but also there's a large number of people online, and that is one of the kind of benefits of the tragedy of COVID, is you can have a global event with a global audience in a global world, but in a local place, in a local city. I'm a big fan of meeting people in person, but the great thing is we can communicate with a much larger audience. And that's incredibly important for the International Union of Architects, because the union is all about exchanging ideas, learning from each other, making sure we don't repeat the mistakes that have been made somewhere else. We repeat mistakes in our own office, so it's easy to do, so it's fairly vital we don't repeat those mistakes across continents and at scale. My name is Simon Alford. I've flown in today. I'm the president of the RIBA. And in this global world, I'm pleased to say I've spent an hour this afternoon in our office here in Madrid. We have a practice in London, but my practice in London has an office here in Madrid. So there's a kind of global exchange that's changed the world quite dramatically for the good. Today is our first ever hybrid session of the Global Architecture Exchange series, and it's called Affordable Housing Mismatch. The Global Architecture Exchanges were developed in 2020. That date is significant because it's a COVID event to kind of bring people together. So it's an event that was online that's now become in person and online, so the new hybrid. It's a partnership between a number of key organisations: the American Institute of Architects, the Australian Institute of Architects, the Architectural Society of China, the Royal Institute of Dutch Architects, the Council of Architecture and Urbanism in Brazil, the Japan Institute of Architects, the Korean Institute of Architects, the New Zealand Institute of Architects, the Royal Institute of the Architects of Ireland, and the Royal Institute of British Architects, and of course hosted here in Madrid in COAM. So it's great to be hosting this with all the sister institutes. And we've got a great lineup, so I'm not going to spend too long introducing people because they introduce themselves. What's important to know is the speakers who have been pre-recorded are talking for 6 minutes, and those who come up on the stage are talking for 6 minutes. And that is the rule of the event, although you're allowed a stumble at the end and a run to 6 minutes, 45 seconds, I'm advised. That is to make it a fair and equitable exchange, and it's also because it would be very nice in the not too distant future to be out on the terrace having a drink and everyone to meet in person. Helping me out today on the panel, and there will be discussion at the end, are Charlotte Sheridan, who is President of the Royal Institute of Architects of Ireland, and Marianne Hassanfar, Vice President of the Conseil National de l'Ordre des Architectes in France, and Jacopo Gressleri, who's from Bologna, a country of its own, a city of food and arcades. So they'll be joining online, and we'll be taking questions from you, the audience, and we'll also be taking questions online. Today's topic is affordable housing mismatch, and we'll hear perspectives from an excellent lineup of speakers based in Europe, Asia, Australia, Asia, and South America. So very different places. I heard someone talking earlier about different problems. You know, in Europe, we might be obsessing with carbon, and in other places, they might be obsessing with homelessness and shanty towns. And this is kind of an exchange of ideas, but also a leveler, where you realise the problems that you don't have, the problems that others have, and we can kind of hopefully work together more to exchange ideas. Some of the presentations will be recordings, but it's this conversation that I think is why the UIA exists. And the mismatch, in a way, we all have mismatches in our own world, but there's also this mismatch between us all and the lessons we're learning from each other and the different speeds and pressures we're under. So in advance, I'd like to thank all our speakers. I will introduce them individually as we go through the presentations. So the first speaker to come up are Denise Murray and Johnny McKenna of Metropolitan Workshop, Dublin and Ireland. Denise is currently studio leader at Metropolitan Workshop Dublin. She has more than 15 years experience and has worked on a wide range of projects from public buildings to complex projects in Ireland, the UK and France. Her colleague John is a partner of the same practice with a focus on urbanism. He studied architecture at University College Dublin and also received an MA in urban design at the University of Westminster. So over to our two speakers. I now presume it will kick in. Over to you. But there's no sound. Sound? We're getting our technical hitch fixed. Ah.
Hi, evening.
You could hear us, we can now hear you. So thank you very much. As I said in the introduction, you have 6 minutes and we're very much looking forward to it. Thank you.
Thanks.
Thanks. Good evening, everyone. We'd like to present to you a flavour of our research and work in practice on the subject of public engagement and how it can enable better and more inclusive outcomes for affordable housing. If we want to address the needs of a wide range of people, then we need an inclusive process that reflects this diversity. People-Powered Places is our ongoing research project. It considers community engagement in its broadest terms, integrating interviews, case studies, and engagement stories by innovative practitioners. On the left of the slide is Arnstein's ladder of citizen participation, a useful touchstone, because it's always critical to be clear with yourself and others where you sit on this ladder from manipulation to citizen control. The People-Powered Places paper covers a broad range of perspectives, including the work of Catherine Grieg of Make Good, who speaks about the importance of transparency when engaging with local communities, and the work of CoLab in Ireland, advocating for a survivor-centred approach to the legacy of our institutions of social care. As part of People-Powered Places, we have a programme of expert-led workshops throughout the year exploring the use of social value measures to drive improvements in housing design. The key aim is the creation of a best practice guide to community participation in housing that will be made available to the wider profession and public. It is important to contextualise this discussion about public engagement. People power is a fact that permeates every aspect of society, from the Occupy movement, Extinction Rebellion to Black Lives Matter, and it's a change in society that cannot be ignored. In Ireland, more recently, a fast-track planning system was instigated for large-scale residential planning, which removed certain public powers to influence the outcomes. It was seen as undemocratic by many and was counteracted by communities through many legal challenges, resulting in 61% of granted permissions in 2021 being subject to judicial reviews through the courts. I don't think anyone would think this was a useful way of engaging with the public. So where is the opportunity now for engagement with the planning system? The public can comment on high-level documents, but they are often too abstract for people to engage with. It's only when planning applications for concrete things come in, and through the current process, there's no opportunity for dialogue, and it all becomes very adversarial. We have two new systems coming in Ireland, the large-scale residential developments and residential developments planning process and urban development zones. But at the moment, there's no commitment within these to make public consultation or a requirement to allow for this more inclusive conversation. So can we do things better? If we could move even half of the energy expended at the end of the process by all parties to the beginning, think of the potential positive impact. There could be workshops, discussions, debates where ideas are explored and tested. The process would certainly be more inclusive, as with the outcomes. And in our experience, it has the potential to turn your adversaries into your advocates for a project.
One of the case studies that formed part of the research paper presented by Denise was the Westbury estate in Lambeth, which was earmarked for regeneration. And the key driver for this was that Lambeth effectively needed to double the density of the estate to provide more housing, more affordable housing in the borough. The work on this project started in a fairly traditional fashion where options were drawn up and presented back to the residents. Now, this was going on against a more general backdrop of scepticism to estate regeneration, particularly in London, and feelings that residents were being left out of the decision-making process. So with the residents of the Westbury estate, we developed a different approach. The first step here was to demystify the process. We made this diagram, to try and explain the process, but also highlight items of concern that were already enshrined within the planning system or policy, such as apartment sizes, kitchen sizes, etc. And it became clear that the residents wanted to become fuller participants in the future planning of their estate, but they were unsure of how to best feed into the process. What we collectively decided to do was to run a series of training workshops to build skills within the residents so that they could participate in the ongoing design process of the estate, such as issues such as density, parking, landscape, open space, height, scale, density, designing for safety. The point of the training was to empower the residents to contribute positively to the design exercises which took place. In parallel, the residents also asked for an independent design advisor who sat outside of the design team who could advise them and be an impartial voice for them through the regeneration project. Through her, the residents drew up a draft residence design brief for the estate. Of course, we also had a client, Lambeth Borough Council, and their brief had to be delivered on as well. However, as the residents became more informed about the process, we were finding that the two briefs were showing more and more overlap. And where there wasn't overlap, it wasn't necessarily that things were at odds with each other. It was more a case that the residents were picking up on items that Lambeth's brief probably wasn't. As the combined briefs became clearer, the optioneering process began to pick up momentum, and we would work often with models because we find that non-professionals can respond much better to them. And also during this period, there's a noticeable change where the level of discussion moved from being one of hesitancy to one of enthusiasm as we began to shape the estate together. These sessions culminated in an exhibition which looked at 3 different options, all of which were assessed against the residents' own brief and Lambeth's brief. There was an infill option, a wholesale demolition and rebuild option, and the option which was ultimately voted for by the residents, which was a hybrid of some demolition and some infill. Now, we're just going to skip forward now because this project has gone through planning, but I just want to show how some of the residents' brief was picked up on. So, for example, the residents liked the fact that their estate had quite loose definition between what was public and private space. So some of the building designs took this into account, where we had to find a balance between openness and security. Or they wanted to make new strong connections to the park, which was located to the south of the estate. So strong visual links were created. Or that the design of some of the buildings should reflect the character of the Wandsworth Road. Or that the layout should maximise the number of new homes that have their front doors onto the street. Or that all shared entrances should have a welcoming feel. They are entrances, after all, to people's homes, and people thought they should be celebrated. Working with the residents of the Westbury estate has been a hugely fulfilling process, and we've witnessed the residents transition from outright cynicism to becoming advocates for and having agency in the regeneration of their estate. Thank you.
Congratulations, thank you very much. A fascinating set of insights into a way of thinking about architecture as engagement with others. I'm now going to welcome our next speaker to the stage, and that is Izumi Sakata of OSA or OSA Japan. Izumi holds a Master of Arts in Architecture from Kyoto University, Graduate School of Technology. He has 30 years experience working under Meikawa Kunio, one of the most prominent modern architects in Japan. He's a lecturer, he's an architect, and the stage is his.
Thank you for introducing. Hello, everyone. My name is Sakata Izumi, an architect of JIA and the president of OSA Social Design Group, working between Japan and Kenya. Before my presentation, I'd like to introduce myself and OSA Social Design Group. Now, why in Kenya? Meikawa Kunio, a prominent modern architect in Japan, and used to be the UIA vice chairman from 1965 to 1969. I was in his office for about 30 years, and during that time I had an opportunity to teach architecture in university in Kenya by order of Japanese government. This is me with my students of Jomo Kenyatta University of Agriculture and Technology in Kenya. Several years after coming back to Japan in the year 2011, I left my Harvard office and established OSA Social Design Group with two Kenyans educated in Japan, Dick Olango, an architect, and Emmanuel Mutisia, an economist, under the motto of Seeds from Japan to be realized in Kenya. Now, I'd like to start my presentation titled Past, Present, and Future of Social Housing Development in Japan. In my presentation of these three sections, I'd like to introduce my affordable housing project in Kenya, developed from the revitalization housing model in Fukushima after the Great East Japan earthquake in 2011. Section 1, Past and Present. The role of the public housing organization in Japan was to solve the serious housing shortage after the World War II. But after going through the economic growth in 1960s, with our society getting into a stable and matured stage, they seem to have completed their role. A typical housing complex developed in 1962, filled with young families and children, has been totally renovated in 2010 to adapt to needs and standards of today. So we can say that their main role of today is not to provide new houses, but to take care of existing housing stock built in more than 50 years ago. Section 2, Beyond Disaster. However, when it comes to the housing supply after the natural disasters like the earthquakes, the typhoons, and so on, which we have almost every year in Japan, the roles of public sector are still important and active. In the Great East Japan earthquake on 11th March 2011, a huge number of refugees had to move to not only from the damaged houses, but also from the radioactive contaminated area by nuclear power plants, had to live to the temporary housing units built far away. Because Fukushima had to build the revitalization houses for the refugees as fast as possible, they used an existing prototype way, their public housing model, approved in a design proposal in 1998, and speedily completed the design of prototype B for their revitalization public housing model in 2015. One point about structure method used in prototype A and B, that is TWFS, thick wall and floor structure, a plain and simple structure which is adaptable to changes of needs and planning in the process of revitalization. Now, section 3, future towards Africa. Prototype A and B in Fukushima are now being transformed into prototype C for an affordable housing model in Kenya by a project team, including me. Prototype C has a unique design system called Facility Separated Housing System, which consists of 3 units: a living unit for ordinary rooms, housing facility unit for toilet, shower, kitchen, gas, solar, and etc., and control unit for controlling the housing facility unit. Housing facility unit is prefabricated with plumbing works and not included in the initial construction cost, but to be subscribed to the owner by a regular small amount of rental charge to reduce the initial cost. And also it can be remote controlled by IoT system. As for structure method in prototype C, TWFS has succeeded from Fukushima model and is to be done with precast concrete. Precast concrete TWFS has advantages in efficiency and simplicity, which will benefit mass supply and capacity building in affordable housing in developing countries. In the precast concrete TWFS, the mechanical joint system of each member is crucial, so the structural experimentation with a life-size model have been executed by the team. We've already done a standard design of an apartment with precast concrete TWFS system. As our partner, we've been collaborating with Jomo Kenyatta University of Agriculture and Technology in Kenya, where I used to be a lecturer and still have a very good sense of mutual trust with each other. As my conclusion, this is the last, sorry. Oh my God. Oh, okay. Actually, I have conclusion slide. As my conclusion, we've been developing, first one, we've been developing our affordable housing model in Kenya from Fukushima model. And the second is, and we believe the same prototype model in Kenya can contribute to revitalization housing after disasters all the world, not only natural disasters, but also man-made disasters like wars. Thank you for listening.
Thank you, Izumi. It was fascinating to see the ideas moving from Japan to Africa and back and forth, and the relevance, in a sense, of the common ground that we all are investigating. Our next speaker is a recorded speaker from China, so I know he'll be in on time. Fan Ho Meng is co-founder and chief architect of the Line Plus studio in China. Mr. Meng has long been committed to the architecture practice of both urban construction and rural revitalization, which is an interesting point, as the urban fascinates architecture, but the rural is often ignored. So over to our recorded speaker, 5, 4, 3, 2, 1, go. Hopefully.
大家好，我是建筑师孟凡浩，非常荣幸受邀参加 RRBA 全球建筑交流会关于保障型住宅的主题论坛。我分享的主题是乡愁和城市梦，以我在中国南部城市杭州做的一个低收入乡村回迁安置房的项目作为案例，与大家分享设计过程和思考。这位是中国的改革开放的总设计师邓小平先生，他提出了让一部分人先富起来，进而实现共同富裕的方针，一直在指引着我们中国的发展。我们都知道，在近40年来，中国经历了急速发展的城市化进程，也可能是全球最快的城市化。但不得不承认的是，城市的发展是建立在消费透支乡村的基础上。我们的乡村正面临着空心化的没落状态。中国政府一直在致力于改善乡村的生活条件，也主导了一系列的乡村振兴的政策。这个图片上的矩阵化的行列式的小洋楼就是我们目前中国的社会主义新农村的一种典型的状态。当地政府委托我们以回迁安置的方式重建东子关这个村子。当我们面对这个课题的时候，首先思考的就是在中国一个典型衰败的村落，如何再造一个新型乡村社区来适应新时期的发展。通过前期调研和分析，我们总结了这个项目当中的3方的一个最重要的诉求。第一个是住宅的真正的使用者原住民，希望能够通过低造价来改善现有的生活和居住条件。第二个呢是项目的投资方，当地政府呢希望能够打造一个值得推广的示范案例。第三个是我们身为建筑师自身的责任感，我们希望能够还原乡村的原真性和多样性，避免再受到城市化的进一步的侵袭。所以综合以上3点呢，我们面临的设计任务呢是寻找一种建筑类型兼顾和平衡多方利益，来回应迫切需要当代化的中国乡村。设计首先确定了2种基本空间单元，再通过单元的旋转和微调形成组团。 再由组团有序生长形成一个由46户组成的一个有机村落。最终形成的总图机理，它是一种类型化的结果，是由最少的单元来实现多样性的这样一个聚落的一个形态。这个我们能看到最终形成的这样一张顶式航拍图。这是项目建成后的实景照片，我们可以看到一个白色的村落镶嵌在原有的生活和环境中，远处是山，近处是水。在更近一点的距离，我们可以看到建筑组团和场地的肌理关系，丰富的屋面形态，街巷的尺度和天然有机的传统村落相同。东直关的生成逻辑也是一个由单元组团逐渐生长成聚落的模式。我们建筑的形式设计受启发于中国传统绘画艺术家吴冠中先生的这幅画，画中所描绘的就是项目所在的江南地区。虽然没有具象的建筑形态，但寥寥几笔就传达出了江南村落的意境和特质。所以我们也是获得灵感，从水墨画中提取元素，然后转译成建筑语言，对中国传统绘画做空间上的解读。这是我们白天看到的一个立面的一个状态，它和原住民们所想的夯土房、木结构民居这些传统的乡村的住宅是完全不同的。整个项目呢，我们采用的是现代的工业化建造，最普通的砖混结构，最经济的白土料和灰面砖，保证每平方米1376元人民币的工程造价，这和普通农民施工队盖房子的成本造价也差不多。新的东直关村呢，和原来的农田、水塘、山水的关系是非常和谐的。从更长远的时间维度看，东直关它既是新的，它也是传统的，有未来可持续性，也有历史的美学韵味。项目建成后受到了非常大的一个关注作为乡村振兴的典型案例，被收录在国家领导人的这样一个治国方略当中。项目建成以后，所以它也产生了非常大的一个社会效应。一个曾经没落的小村落逐渐发展成了新兴的人造景点，为当地带来了旅游业和产业和经济的发展。能看到它是成了一个网络的一个打卡点，好多人在这里拍照。2022年，我们受邀参加威尼斯建筑双年展 How Will We Live Together 军械库的主题展。在我们对东直关进行回访时，发现了一个有趣的现象，整个村落的居住结构和业态的丰富性远超我们的预设。它有曾经的这个原住民，有艺术家工作室，有茶室，有民宿，它最终形成了一个城乡融合的社区状态，很好的回应了共同生活的这样一个主题。我们从中挑选了8户进行了一个展示，他们的一个空间使用状态的一个展示。在微双展览的现场，我们用1:30的微缩模型完整再现了46户居住的一个建筑形态，并设计了一个可以自由进入的街巷的间距尺度。参观者可以从人视点的角度观察和体验村民的日常生活。同时，我们选取了典型的8户家庭，打开建筑剖面，还原空间中真实的生活场景。我们可以看到，在同一建筑类型中，不同使用方式所产生的空间的丰富性。东直关是一个当代的村落它用当代的建筑材料，用当代的建造方式，实现了一个为当代农民居住的新型乡村社区为他们圆一个城市梦。
Thank you, Mr. Meng. Our next speaker is again a recording, this time from Waterloo in London. Lomre Bellardi of Bellardi Design Studio, GDS, is a client and architect, and that particular role, twin role he plays, gives him a particular perspective on affordable housing in the UK. So as co-founder of a sustainable design practice of commissioning and constructing architecture, over to Lomre Bellardi.
Good evening, ladies and gentlemen. Buenas noches desde Londres. It's a pleasure to be presenting to you in Madrid at the Affordable Housing Activation Forum. The focus of my presentation will be on the mismatch between the urgent energy efficiency imperative on our hands here in the UK versus the lack of focus on retrofit as a means to addressing this climate emergency issue. I'm Lanre Balade, a chartered architect and co-founder of Balade Design Studio, a sustainability and design-led practice based out of Waterloo in London. The UK is facing huge socio-economic as well as environmental challenges, including rising energy bills and energy security. We've got challenges around affordable housing provision. The construction industry is lacking in labour by way of numbers, as well as skills to increase productivity levels. And we've got the levelling up agenda, which is looking to redistribute wealth more equitably across the country. And we've got ageing populations who are tackling also obviously with the challenges of fuel poverty. And as a country, we are looking to recover from COVID in terms of economic prosperity. To address the energy efficiency imperative, we need to look at the 29 million existing homes in the UK. 26 million of these need some form of retrofit, and 19 million of these homes are on the bottom rungs of the energy performance rankings with a rating of D or below. 1 in every 6 tonnes of carbon emitted from the UK comes from existing housing. And over 10% of our housing stock was built very quickly and poorly insulated between the 2 world wars, known as interwar housing. These homes could be attracting £2,000 per annum by way of heating and gas bills if they're not addressed. From a national perspective, it appears that the government has really kind of missed the significance of the energy efficiency imperative by failing to provide effective policy and funding mechanisms that will really address these issues at scale. So the recent energy security and heat and building strategies have really missed the importance of the imperative, with some of the measures that are being proposed being quite short and small scale rather than being large and sustained and long term. It appears that the current focus for the government is largely on addressing building regulations, which has been a key focus over the last couple of years. It's also been focusing on new build housing and promoting that widely across the UK. And we've also got a situation whereby new sustainable power has been very much a focus as well in terms of rapidly decarbonising the UK's power sector with new technology supported by policy, therefore making carbon reductions relatively cheap and technically straightforward, and promoting things like wind power, for example, which is now the cheapest form of electricity generation in the UK and provides 1/6 of power, up from 2% in less than a decade. So to show the seriousness of the issue at hand, whilst much of the homes built prior to the Second World War have been replaced, interwar homes still make up a large proportion of the existing stock in the UK at approximately 3.3 million homes. Data evidently shows the residents in this type of housing have the largest share of fuel poverty and the average highest gap. Furthermore, interwar homes make up 50% of solid war houses in the UK, and with 18% of interwar households living in fuel poverty, retrofitting these would drive down the number of fuel poor households significantly. And here is, I guess, the big opportunity. So as you can see on this diagram on the right hand side, solid war properties are still very much prevalent within the UK, and they are largely, in terms of up to 90%, 95% of these houses are still uninsulated. So this is obviously a huge problem, but equally a very large opportunity. The UK's housing stock is quite poor. There's drafty, they're cold, they can be damp with condensation and mold building up. And the UK residents are now beginning to kind of take to the streets in terms of protesting and looking at ways in which they can force the government to really take action. So in terms of examples, there are quite a number of case studies around the UK in relation to retrofit exemplar case studies. However, what we're finding is that many of these are quite small scale. We have limited supply chains that are capable of delivering large scale, high quality retrofit programs. There's no overarching government strategy at the moment that really kind of ties together all the various grants and programs and training skills programs. So increasingly we're seeing reduced incentives for adoption at scale. From a supply side perspective, we're seeing a lot of support from government for wind power, solar power, hydrogen being heavily invested in and promoted. And we're also seeing, obviously, the promotion of heat pumps, continued support for solar, as well as external wall insulation systems as well. So from a supply side perspective, we're very well supported. Here we can see that there are lots of opportunities and programs around retrofit being promoted by government as well as independent bodies. But similarly to the construction industry, we have a lot of fragmentation within the retrofit sector. So much of these organizations and bodies work in some ways independently, and there's no connectivity and golden thread that ties all of these innovative programs together. So all of these measures are very helpful. However, in order for us to have a really strong national retrofit strategy, we do need to make sure we've got government demand side responses, we've got long sustained government intervention, including investment in upskilling and training the labour market. We need to prioritise a fabric first approach. We need to address the large amount of interwar housing that's been built at scale but is very poorly insulated. We need to continue to support social housing as well as the private sector in terms of those that are living in fuel poverty within the private sector as well. And we also need to ensure that we're making the most of the technology that already exists to decarbonise our existing stock much more rapidly and to a higher level of performance. Thank you. Espero que esto haya sido perspicaz. Gracias.
Thank you, Lonray. An absolutely vital field. You know, the housing is built, so how do we make it work for the next suite of generations? Our next speaker is here in person. He's come from Brazil. Antonio Couto Nunes. Antonio is an architect and urban planner. He received his Master's in Architecture and Urbanism in 2017. He's currently studying an MBA in Economics and Sustainability Management with an emphasis on smart cities at the UFRJ Institute of Economics. He's a special advisor to the President of Brazil, and his master's degree was called My House, My Life in Brazil. Can you do that in 7 minutes? Antonio, the floor is yours.
Okay. Hi, everyone. Good evening. Well, oh, this is... Okay. Oh, okay. Well, thanks for the introduction. On behalf of our president, Nadia Somek, I'd like to thank RIBA for the opportunity to be here and talk about what we're doing about social housing. And I'm not a native English speaker, so I apologize in advance if I made some mistakes in my speech. And I'll start my presentation with some context about housing in Brazil, and then I'll talk about the actions we are taking to help overcome some obstacles on affordable housing there. Okay. So inequality in Brazil has led us to an impressive number of 25 million unhealthy and unsafe dwellings, meaning that almost a third of our population lives under these circumstances. In the last decade, we produced more than 6 million new units under the program My House, My Life, but still, the lack of affordable housing is huge. We have about 56% of issues related to urban infrastructure, such as sanitation, water access, electricity, and about 44% on housing improvement issues. We are dealing already with an enormous demand to improve housing. And with the pandemic, it only makes it worse. In addition, what the market is producing doesn't meet the needs of the population living under these conditions. It's essential that the public authorities have a special look at this matter. One thing we're trying to enforce in our speech is that housing conditions have a strong influence on people's health. It's important to reinforce that this complex scenario needs integrated solutions, especially when we talk about climate change. To illustrate the need for healthy spaces, we collected data about the risk of death by COVID-19 in slum areas, in favelas like Rocinha in Rio de Janeiro, that have many places without access to sunlight or adequate ventilation. These places still suffer from other diseases that have had treatment protocols for a long time, such as tuberculosis. The number of tuberculosis cases in Brazilian favelas are huge, and they are growing. In addition to that, we can include climate crisis and its disasters to worsen the picture. Here we can see some floods, droughts, land collapses, wildfires. Most of these tragedies happen in poor areas in Brazil. And if we check their frequency, we can see that they're becoming more frequent and also more severe. Then we're faced with the fact that 85% of population in Brazil doesn't have access to technical assistance of architects or engineers. This data is a strong alert for us as the council that regulates the profession in Brazil. We must do something to meet the population's needs and redistribute the architects' workforce to a field that has a few professionals and a huge demand. This is a social responsibility of our profession. Our goal, together with our fellows from other entities in Brazil, such as the Institute of Architects of Brazil and the National Federation of Architects, is to promote the widest possible access to architecture and urbanism in our society. In Brazil, we have a law called ATIS, which states that every poor family has the right to be assisted by an architect or an engineer. Unfortunately, this law still didn't change our professional standards, especially because of the lack of political decisions on prioritizing housing policies. For that reason, we are working to spread the information both to population and to public authorities. We also allocate at least 2% of our revenue to finance projects that turn this law into reality, producing good quality architecture and urban spaces built together with the community. These examples are helping to show our representatives that it's not only a matter of financial resources, but a matter of political understanding and social responsibility. We are financing these actions under goals we pointed in the manifesto that we shared in the World Congress of Architects, which was held last year in Rio de Janeiro. The Manifesto for Housing Dignity points 6 main axes of actions as it follows in the screen. To be aware of the need for architecture to improve the quality of life, to aid in making the law of ATIS into a state policy, such as our public health system and a public legal advice system, for instance, to assist municipalities and states to implement the ATIS law, to aid public legal advisors on helping those without access to housing through public policies, to fund groundbreaking and innovative ATIS projects and actions across the country, to foster ATIS as a subject in colleges and universities to change the professional culture and make it closer to social housing demand. These goals are part of the program More Architects, our proposal to foster decent housing for all, which we presented last week through an AHA event, and it's available on our YouTube channel. In the Council, we have been talking with more effort about this law since 2015, but architects and social organized movements have been talking about it for a longer period. They created this law, ATIS, and contributed to the Constitutional Article 182, an important milestone for the urban legislation in Brazil. It's about right to the city. We are also trying new ways of communication by reaching the population in the platform they're using. Social media in Brazil is huge, and everyone is searching for information there. So we're holding online events with influencers related to the low-income population to talk to them directly about their rights and the importance of healthy and safe spaces. Okay. We do believe that these actions, along with the virtuous legislation and practice legacy in Brazil, can transform our cities and change the paradigm of our profession. It's a long journey, but we have already started. And that's all. I hope I didn't pass too long for the 6 minutes.
Thank you, Antonio. A fascinating insight into the design of sort of legislation and law to liberate impoverished communities and give them architecture. Our next speakers are Hideki Iwahara and Ako Nagao, architects from Japan. They established their office in 2020, and they look to expand the definition of the environment and explore new possibilities for architecture. Their project, the Public Reconstruction Housing in Nakamichi to Yabuki, has received many awards. They will now talk on the screen.
We are Hideki Wahori and Ako Nagao of Hideki Wahori Nagao Ako Architect Office. We will present our project Abiko House, a renovation of one unit in a housing complex. It is a prototype of affordable housing that utilizes existing stock to promote the well-being of the elderly. The site is in the suburbs of Tokyo. It is a housing complex that was developed by a private developer in the 1970s. It has about 1,000 units and includes a store, a city hall annex, and a meeting hall. There is a community of mainly senior citizens. The former unit was a typical 3-bedroom plan. It features advanced technology for the time, including a stairwell-type plan allowing apertures on two sides, a structure with no interior load-bearing walls, and radiate heating panels as standard equipment. The open one-room The plan after renovation removes all existing partition walls to create a single open space. The large room was then divided into several areas of different sizes and orientations. By softly partitioning a large space, we can create distinct areas while allowing occupants to feel each other's presence. The toilet and shower area are partitioned simply with translucent fitting. By integrating it into the living space, the bathroom becomes a more comfortable and usable place. This plan is designed to resolve the physical and social barriers faced by the elderly while taking advantage of the features of the existing apartment. To achieve this, we compose the space with 4 architectural elements: environmental interior scheme, utility lintels, shelving posts, and curtains.
The environmental interior scheme is the 3 layers existing inside the building, which are the frame, insulation, heat storage, and finish. This mechanism creates an indoor climate that works gently with the elderly, with weakening bodies and dwelling senses. Insulation layers are applied the thermal weak points in the frame to protect the interior. The radiant heating created through the combination of existing heating panels and the new thermal storage layer on the floor provides a thermal barrier and gentle air conditioning without airflow. The heat insulation and thermal storage layer is covered and visualized by a finishing layer of rubber plywood. A newly installed wind catcher directs gentle natural breeze into the room to keep it cool. The utility lintels, shelving posts, and curtains are devices that create a variety of spaces to accommodate the changing lifestyles of the elderly. The utility lintels are the grid of wiring ducts suspended from the ceiling, allowing for the free installation of lighting fixtures and electrical outlets according to how the space is used. The shelving posts are lattice-shaped partitions and storage spaces, allowing the user to freely divide a single-room space. The curtain is partition of mosquito net fabric suspended from wires, creating an ingenious boundary. It creates a space that balances unity and diversity. The 4 elements are categorized according to their renewal period. The environment interior scheme and utility lintels are the elements that need to be renewed by a specialist every few decades. The shelving columns and curtains can be updated by the user every few years. materials for the parts that the user can update are industrial products that are already available at hardware stores and can be assembled and disassembled without special techniques. This is a system that allows users themselves to enjoy participating in the making and updating of their living space. The open space configuration gentle indoor climate system for creating diverse place and mechanism for participatory space making let occupant freely create place from mingling with others. Hobby space, workspace, or caregiver space can be placed close to the front door. This facilitates interaction with others from a quick chat to social support with change. As a result of our aim to promote the well-being of the elderly, we have created a blank space that encourages residents to create their own lives. We believe that in the coming society of diversifying lifestyles and super aging, there is potential in this kind of weak architecture that takes from only when occupants actively get involved. This is the end of our presentation.
Thank you to Hideki and Akko talking about a kind of long life, loose fit idea of retrofit and soft architecture. It didn't look weak to me, but it looked soft. We're now going to travel to New Zealand to watch the presentation from our next two speakers. Mate Kitty Tahi, Rawiri McDonald, and Ramiko Alexander Tuina Kwafi are both Indigenous Maori architects from New Zealand, and they're going to talk about their work in TOA Architects. Over to them now. Thank you.
Toko koi te pō nui, te pō roa, te pō uriuri, te pō whāwha, te pō te kitea, te pō te whaia, tēnā toko kātū ko te toko tā rea ruanuku o te atua ki te pō. Toko koi te ao nui, te ao roa, te ao mārama, te ao whēkere, te ao whatumā, te ao pōtanga o tēnā kātū o tū mai ki te ao, ka puta ki te whaia o ki te ao mārama, haumi e hui e tāi ki e te hunga mate kia rātau te hunga mate, haere atura. Tātou te hungora kia tātou te hungora, tihei mauri ora. E ngā iwi take o te ao, tēnā koutou, tēnā koutou, tēnā koutou katoa. Kia ora, ko Matiki Tātai tōku ingoa.
My name is Ramika. Matiki Tātai and I both represent Aotearoa New Zealand, the New Zealand Institute of Architects. We both work for Toa Architects, which is an Indigenous-owned practice of 35 people located in Auckland, the Bay of Plenty, and Wellington, New Zealand. Nō reira tēnā koutou katoa.
The theme of our kōrero today is He kōtuku rerenga tahi, which is a Māori proverb which translates to a white heron's flight is seen but once. This is used to indicate a very special or rare person or event. So we thank you all for this opportunity to share in today's kōrero. The kaupapa project we'll focus our talk on today is Te Kōtukutuku, which is a Māori Indigenous-led social housing project located in Otara, South Auckland, and Tāmaki Makaurau. It is centered on the values of health, well-being, culture, and community.
Established in 1997, our client Mahitahi Trust assists residents in their desire to regain mental, physical, and spiritual wellness through providing integrated services underpinned by tikanga Māori. Toa was approached in 2017 to help in the design and delivery of Te Kōtukutuku, the first purpose-built Māori facility of its kind. Kōtukutuku has dynamic forms drawn from Tāmaki Makaurau pūrākau or narratives, paying homage to the great ancestor Tara Mainuku, of which the place Otara is named. We have shown our original narrative sketch, which conceptualizes the story into a diagram that is then translated into architecture. The conceptual narrative reflects the proverb, do not turn your head until you pass the safety net of Tara, which references a treacherous sandbar in the Manukau harbour. It wasn't until you passed the sandbar that you were able to reach safety. Te Kōtukutuku nurtures its residents and enables them to heal in a safe environment. This project challenges and brings a new perspective to the notion of medium density living, with two waka, the two canoe forms, housing the whānau, a central courtyard holding the safety net of tara, and the residents living together within an environment that places their well-being and care at the heart of their kāinga, their home. The whare manaki anchors and steadies the double-hold waka or canoe, allowing everyone to work and gather together for events. The building stands seamlessly in the landscape with dynamic forms and shapes which speak to the movement of waka on the ocean. So you see the two double-hold waka around the courtyard with the whare manaki anchoring at the bottom. The residents who live here, tangata whaiora, previously may have been living in unhealthy and sometimes unsafe environments, whereby now the quality of life has been improved through living in a supportive and understanding community. Here you see an image of one of those beautiful people that live in this facility. Mental health and other support services are brought directly to the residents without them having to go out to hospitals or medical clinics, which is hard if you don't have money for those services or even a car or access to a car. Support is provided on site by the trust, with the whare manaki, the communal building, being the home for these services. The dynamic forms of the building reinforces the values of the narratives we have spoken about, of the harbour providing a safety and a nurturing place. Additionally, these narratives, through whakairo, Māori design elements have been sandblasted into the timber of the facade, and you also see that in the structural members that hold up the roof. Our Indigenous design process has been drawn from whakapapa of the whenua, the many layers of Māori occupation within the surrounding landscape of Tāmaki Makaurau. We are guided by our ancestors and have a responsibility as Māori architects to provide guidance and be intentional in how we design for our communities now and into the future. Te Ko Tukutuku Kāinga has intentionally used a number of sustainable design techniques, such as the use of CLT, timber structure, and locally sourced timber cladding, rainwater harvesting, natural ventilation, other important features. However, one of the most important is a tangible thing such as a marakai.
We are continuing to define and shape the Māori architectural process for today's ever-changing world. We as Pauwaihanga Māori architects are able to mediate the mana, spiritual authority and relationships of each entity involved with the project, from the taiao environment, tangata, people, government, communities, and so on. Pauwaihanga are able to go between the sacred and the profane, from the whenua, the land, the tangata, the people, the pānga, the function, and imbue that through the process of design and construction, defining the architecture created. Pauwaihanga are also able to navigate tikanga, traditions, customs, and practices, and apply those value systems appropriately to the process of design to achieve meaningful outcomes, not only culturally, but in all areas of consideration when undertaking an architectural project. A Pauwaihanga understands these traditional knowledge systems with a creative mind and uses these art forms of te toiariki, the art knowledge of authority, te toiuru tapu, the art knowledge of sacredness, te toiururangi, the art knowledge of divinity, te toiuru roa, the art knowledge of creativity, to create te toi waihanga, the art knowledge of construction. So in conclusion, te toi waihanga Māori Indigenous architecture encompasses all of these facets and manifests in the knowledge and design and construction. Te toi waihanga offers a more holistic approach to the architectural process and delivers broader outcomes to the value system of traditional architecture. Ka mā taku hau tū, ka mā taku hau mahi, ka mā moi tū, ka mā moi rere, ka mā te ariki, ka mā te tauira, tū turu whiti whakamaua kia tīna, tīna, hui e tāi ki e. Kia ora tātou.
Thanks to you both for a very interesting insight into culture, architecture, and the challenges we all face as designers. Our next speaker is coming to the stage. It's Yung Kun Han. He received his degree and diploma from the French government. He is currently the president of Archipoly Architects Limited, the vice president of the Korean Institute of Architects, Commissioner of Presidential Commission on Architecture Policy of the Republic of Korea, and a member of the UIA Social Habitat Work Programme Committee. Yong Kun Han, nice to see you. Thank you.
Hello. Ladies and gentlemen, I'm Han Yong-kun. You can call me Han. I'm Vice President of the Korean Institute of Architects, and also too, so I'm architect and professor in Hongik University. Okay, today I want to introduce the Sinne Compact City. That was international competition. Now we start to build end of the years. It's very big challenge. Firstly, I explained what is the affordable housing in Korea. We can call the social housing, maybe. You know, in Korea, in these years, we have the 550,000 units for these years. Last years we built. It means during the 10 years from the 2012, each year's about the 600,000 units we built, the apartment or residence, the housing. In the last year's 550,000 unit. In the 550,000 unit, we built the social housing is 405,000. For who the social housing is a low income, but who cannot buy immediately his house. You know, before we make the social housing, one building, all the building inside all the people who life is a poor people, or is a complex. We know we can identify who is this quarter is not it's a very poor people who living. But now it's very important for the social housing policy. We call the social mixed. You don't know what is the unit is the social housing. It means I think it is very important, this policy. You know, in Korea, we make the so biggest quantity, we made the big quantity during the 10 years ago. We are very specialist, tema. And last one is maybe an indicative. There is a cost of the social housing is the 80% the price than market price. It means the center of the city social housing also too higher than around the limit to the city. It's a normal, but 80% the market price we supply by the government supply the social housing. I think it's very indicative for you. After inside the 80%, we have the so many level calculation is so complicated for explain to you. Okay, now. Based on this background, I introduce why we made this project. sorry. Yeah, that is important because we have the 1 million population inside the 605 square meter. This means that we have the 4 million population. So 1/4 is in Seoul. You know we have the Hangang. Seoul is we have the Hangang River and mountain. The space constraint, and the railway load is 22.4%. You know, in Seoul, land is very expensive. You know that during the 10 years we made so many construction, we cannot find the land disponible for the new housing. Okay, now so we have the land with well, sorry. Yeah, this way is the highway. That is the railroad. It means between the quarter is here. We have the very big residence, and the other also too. But we have not communicated. And we did this new project. We connected the two quarter using this part of the land for new housing. And we have the new urban environment creation and education support, and we make with the industrial startup and accelerator, and for make the vitalize your local community. I'm so sorry because my English is very bad, but I know you understand very well. Because you know that I'm French architect, but my language, first language is French, but the English is not so good. Okay, this is a result. And we make the social smart city and multi-level city, and also to the green city. I think it's the saying is very explanative, because you're an architect. I don't need the explaining. Okay, we have so many social complex, etc., etc. And this is very important. We making the cover the infrastructure, and we also we cover by the green space maximum, and we making the sky housing on the mega structure. Of course, always the green city and green network, and for the recycling the energy and the eco traffic system. And we have there is a design process. And the new ground corridor, and we made the new ground and the corridor bridge for related to area. And on the bridge, we made the space park. This is a site plan. This is the part of the sky housing. And that is a social mix plan, because in Korea, social housing between the 40 square meter to 85 square meter. We cannot over than 85 square meter. That is, I think, we can explain next. But that is we chose something modular house, because we call it the flexible unit, and we have the module, a small module, and we multiple, and this part is the sky on the bridge. So we make the modular. Is input to the prefabrication, and the other part is RC. I'm so sorry, because I got very fast. Yeah, we have the 9 unit the modular, and the urban life scenario, and the civil structure. How we made this one. This is structure and modular design. Okay, thank you.
Thank you very much, Han. Fascinating insight into the return of the megastructure. Our final speakers will be coming from Australia. William Riley of Weston Williamson and Partners Australia, and Marco Kubilos and Dr. Angelica Rojas of Include Design. Over to them. This is our last 6-minute slot.
Hello everyone, my name is Will Riley and I'm a New South Wales registered architect, a member of the Australian Institute of Architects and Managing Director of Weston Williamson and Partners here in Australia. We've been invited to present our submission for the Living Village competition, which we were honoured to be selected as part of the winning submissions by the Institute. The South Australia Housing Authority and the City of Unley, with the endorsement of the Australian Institute, held this design ideas competition for a residential living village. The competition sought to design a mixed-use residential housing village that encapsulates innovative design for residential living, developed on the principles of energy efficiency, environmental, community and cultural sustainability. The project location is south of Adelaide City Centre, as part of the up-and-coming district of Unley. The site sits within a vibrant growth centre named Unley Central. We analysed the requirements of the brief and did a quick block and stack, layering the commercial, retail, social, affordable and market housing and associated car parking. We then sense-checked this against the developable envelope, modelling the solar planes from adjacent property boundaries delivered from the local planning code. The site was overloaded. The ground plane and movement paths become congested and unclear, and open space, solar access and outlook were all compromised. In response, we reviewed the City of Unley Development Plan and the Unley Central Precinct Plan. We then overlaid the Future Transport Plan that showed proposals for light rail into the CBD along Unley Road. We recognised the potential for the precinct to grow and deliver density to the north, and the reality of that potential, with single ownership land, big box retail, and a chance to go higher without overshadowing the park. The Future Transport Plan makes the precinct connected and viable for jobs uplift. We considered the phasing of the master plan from south to north and how the new land parcels could be formed to be both serviceable and developable. Important consideration has been given to the streets in our plan. Our bold new north-south pedestrian connection, Unley Walk, is offset by a series of dissecting streets, each with a specific character and feel. At the heart of the scheme is the new plaza. By resetting the site boundary, we've breathed new life into the heritage building as the centrepiece in a north-facing public square. This new civic space is hardscaped with green soft edges, so as not to echo the amenity of the existing park and encourage other uses as day turns to night and through changing seasons. A diagonal connection from the new central plaza to Unley Road provides a desire line to the future tram stop and provides adequate dwell space on the corner to meet people before heading into the city. Townhouses bookend the podium and flexible studio retail spaces sandwich as infill. These are important spaces for the precinct as their scale makes them flexible and have with the ability to evolve to suit changing market demands, providing sustained job growth into the future. Unley Walk provides frontage and presence to the previously concealed hub. This is activated by retail and the townhouse modules that are in sync with the adjacent residential scale and grain. Instead of an overdeveloped and congested site, we now have a vibrant 24/7, high-quality, well-connected community hub that the affordable homes are proudly part of. Our vision for the living village is a path to strengthening our communities. Drawing on targets set out in the 30-year plan for Greater Adelaide, we set out to achieve new models of housing by designing a future adaptation as part of the Day One scheme. Our proposal is simple: cross-laminated timber frame structure which allows prefabricated units to slot into grids in various combinations. A modular system which can adapt its spatial needs subject to shifting demographics. This simple module not only allows for versatility at the time of lease or purchase, but enables change and adaptation through the life of the building. This grid allows for growth laterally and across levels to create lasting homes as part of an evolving living village. The flexible housing sits above the garden podium, providing privacy while still being connected to the hub and village. Open air and covered walkways provide circulation, and these volumes are punched with openings for communal gardens and co-living spaces that allow the compact apartments units to breathe. We envision a living village to truly have a healthy and thriving life of its own.
Thanks, Will. Hi, everyone. Thank you for the opportunity to share with all of you our winning entry and the thinking behind it. We are Include Design Architects. I am Angelica Rojas, the co-creative director of our studio, and my colleague Marco Cubillos, design director. When people talk about what is great about living in a village, the most common words used to describe this experience are community, relationships, and safety. Our proposal does not take these three words for granted. We approach this design challenge by asking, what are the special ingredients that enable a sustainable, affordable, and thriving living village? What are the place assets that the design needs to integrate and celebrate? How to enable density while providing a platform that fosters communities? Our proposal brings together 9 principles responding to these questions. The first is about being respectful to context by responding sensitively to each interface. The second is about a place that celebrates the existing place assets such as the Heritage Mornington House. The third is a place to connect. The proposal transforms the site into a network of shared spaces, supporting pedestrian flows and creating 2 new lanes. This is also a place to share. Common spaces are strategically located to enable communities and support passive surveillance, creating opportunities to meet, gather, play, grow food, and relax. Enabling a vibrant community by providing a diversity of spaces to meet between neighbors, family, friends, and co-workers, and by offering multiple uses at ground level, gardens, and open spaces. The next principle is creating a comfortable place to live. The project applies a series of passive design principles to create comfortable and delightful homes. A place that cares and is mindful about the use of resources of our shared global home, integrating aspects that are intrinsic to the space, such as clean energy and urban cooling principles, and creating a platform that enables residents to choose greener options for transport, composting, fresh food gardens, and so on. Affordability is central to our scheme, so design elements and spaces are integrated to serve multiple purposes. Size is a key matter in affordability, so we propose compact, flexible, and efficient dwellings, and other cost-effective design strategies such as standardization of services, rationalized structure, and form.
The ground level design carefully integrates different activities with the residential use, the space between the buildings, the landscape, the gardens, and the connectivity that is created within and around the site. The proposal comprises 1, 2, and 3 bedroom dwellings. This layout responds to those principles mentioned before. We carefully tested the building separation, proposed halls that are well lit, considered the spatial quality of the shared circulations, and where to locate the stairs, the lift, and the common areas. For instance, the raised common spaces located at the first level are dedicated to the residents to foster connections while feeling less public than the lanes and gardens proposed at the ground level.
Thank you very much. 10 architects, 4 continents, an hour and a half. I think that's pretty good. There is an idea of drinks on the terrace, and there is also an idea of questions, but it's been a very long day. What I thought I might do is invite the panelists to the stage and ask them each to make one comment about what they've taken away from today, and then if there is a question, I'll take it. But I think that there's sometimes a moment where you've got to take time to take it in. But would the panelists want to come to the stage? And I'll just ask you each to reflect on, I mean, we meet because of this idea of exchanging ideas and mismatch. So come to the stage, take a seat, and then in turn you can just give us your reflections on what you take away from the discourse. And obviously we have 4 panelists online, so I'll invite you to do the same. If a question arises, we'll take it, but if not, I think there's a moment where you've got to go with the flow. Should I start online with Marianne? Are you okay just to talk a little bit about how you perceive this from the space you're in, and the connections, the differences, and also the similarities of the challenges that we saw being addressed in different ways today? I've put you on the spot.
Yes. Hello, everybody. Thank you very much for these presentations. It is very interesting to see that we have all of us the same aim, the same goal to do a sustainable but affordable and desirable house. And at France, we have the same problems that in South Korea and a lot of other places, in Japan also, is the land problem. And what is interesting is to see how we don't have any more lands, available lands, and how we can rehabilitate our existing buildings, and how we can, so the level city is very interesting also, and how to improve the quality of the housing for all by using less materials doing capable volumes as our Japanese colleagues demonstrated to us. So I have a question, but I don't know if someone have already worked on that. I would like to know if someone have worked on the community land trust, because at France we are very interested about that, and we want to know how we can encourage the home ownership by dissociating buildings from land. And if someone has this experience, and if we can speak about that also.
Can I suggest that we pick that up through a kind of conversation afterwards? Because you've got an audience of 50 people in the room and 100 online, and then we could maybe play back that question and then capture. Then we can actually connect people up on that conversation.
You are the master of the ceremony.
I'm not the master. I'm just trying to take some kind of control. But yes. I think that's a very valid question, because I think housing and land ownership, architecture doesn't solve the challenges there. But I think that's something we could maybe pick up and then recirculate.
Of course.
Next, I'd like to ask Denise and Johnny if they'd like to talk about. You talked about a particular way of engaging in consultation, less about the outcome, and that was obviously a considered choice. What observations have you got on what you've seen today?
I suppose we just decided to kind of pick up on one main point, which was interesting to see the parallels between Ireland and China, which you might not think would spring to mind, but this desire for low-rise, high-density housing, that's a big issue here. And I suppose while we do have some land issues, they're nothing compared to what the previous speaker was speaking about. So really, it's about affordability of construction, and the big issue here is just the cost of building apartments, really, and the cost of building multiple cores, and then the long-term cost to residents of sharing that burden of servicing those more expensive elements. So it's a big push in this country to look at that low-rise, high-density model, and it's also seen as more attractive to a country and a population that aren't used to apartment living as a way of life, through all ages. It's seen as something as a transitory thing for the younger part of the population. So I find that very interesting to see.
Thank you. Johnny, is there anything you want to add to that?
I just agree with what Denise said. I think we're looking at various models. Our planning policy and our kind of housing guidelines are quite restrictive in this country, and I would say don't allow for much innovation. I think they will be challenged in the years to come, because we've got to start looking at alternative ways of doing this.
On a personal note, I can say that I've spent quite a lot of time in Ireland because my wife's Irish, and I've spent a fair amount of time in China. And there's a Chinese drink called kei chow, which is very much like pochine. It's a kind of paint stripper. So there are other similarities between the two countries and cultures. Charlotte, would you like to sort of reflect? And thank you for joining us.
Yes, thank you, Simon. And I'm sorry I'm not there. And the reason, in fact, it's quite particular to what's resonated with me. I couldn't be there today because we were launching our national policy on architecture, which is a really great milestone for us to have got to this point. It's our third national policy on architecture in 20 years. But I suppose the thing that has really resonated with me throughout is that need for policy, and that you need to have proper guidance in place to facilitate and to ensure that you're getting appropriate development. But also, I suppose, that you get, as Denise and Johnny pointed out as well, that need for proper public engagement. And if policy is there and is really given direction for that to happen, then it will happen. And I suppose what Johnny and Denise really highlighted in terms of the issues here are trying to incorporate development forms that we're maybe not used to. So it's at higher density within existing contexts. And I suppose you really need to build certainty. First of all, I suppose, understanding the public's needs, what their concerns are, but that you also respond to that and that you create that certainty for those people that this is going to be a positive addition to their place. And I think that there's great advantage as well too in creating that certainty through policy and plan making, as well for the speculator or for the developer, the investor who's bringing development to a new area. And I suppose what often happens is speculation, and that in itself then has the impact on land values. So I suppose if you can have some kind of control and create that certainty, you reduce that level of speculation, and that in itself then would positively impact on viability in a sense. So yeah, it is really policy, and policy as an enabler is a key point.
Thank you. I mean, I think that architects engage with a diverse sort of suite of design challenges, but perhaps we do particularize too much into the project, which is why I was interested today in the different ways of people looking at what is the project. Jacopo Gresleri, you're from Bologna, Italy, where there's sort of one architect to 8 people. I'm sure a large number of them are involved in policy and politics. Are there any comments you'd like to contribute, having reviewed the 10 presentations?
Thank you. Thank you, Simon. Well, it's hard to say something which could be generally equal for all of this stuff. But I try to focus on a few items that I took note during this different intervention that were very interesting. It was like a storm. Pills, but very condensed with a lot of meaning. So what I saw from all of these different interventions and the things that were told us during those 2 days, yesterday and today in the morning, is that what I see is a very different orientation in the modern, the contemporary social housing, which is no more housing, or not only housing, but home. That is a difference that in the English language is pretty clear, but it's not the same translated in, for instance, into Italian or in other languages. This some way has some returns in terms of creation of community and a specific attention to the environment. Those two things are pretty new. I would say they are totally new. The intention of the creation of community, it's something that deals with, I would say, co-housing and collaborative housing. So it's something that is not so common in social housing. But it's a very important item because around this new concept turns all of this new project design of these buildings. For instance, the approach to the environment is something which was never thought before. We have thousands of examples, not only in Italy, but in Europe and all over the world, about social housing, where housing is just the house. Why now is this wave, this orientation, this intention to produce a strict link between the house, the services, the facilities, the community itself, spaces, environment, all of those things are part of the project. And within the project, there is this refrain where we always listen about adaptability and flexibility within the buildings, which is very interesting because every single country has a different interpretation of this. So we have seen projects that maybe in some countries would be even not accepted. But these, all of these things we have seen are a real, I would say, a real lab. I think we should consider all of these examples as a perfect lab to see and to test, to stress until the very end what is possible to do in this huge sector, which is this social housing. It's very interesting. The condensation of 100 of different possibilities.
Thank you. I mean, architecture is always a test bed. The challenge we face, of course, is every project's a test, and then when we finish, life takes over. And it's that balance of experimentation, innovation, with actually solving the problems of the day and future generations. And obviously, your client is often nothing to do with the people who will live there. Han, would you like to? Is there anything you'd like to comment upon? The microphone's there.
Well, you know that I talk about the more unity, but it's the Jacob, the equipment, the facility is very important in Korea. Now we are more developed than 20 years ago. Why? Because the education, we action to education. You know now you cannot sell your housing if you are promoter. You cannot sell if you have not structured very good school or very good academy, because our objective of it, all the parents' objective is his child enter the good university. It means if you very famous the academy or the school, the residence price is more expensive than other environment is best. But it's very complex. The social housing, we cannot, point of view only space, green space, etc. It's problem the attached to the education is very important in Korea, and it's very, I don't know why, but it's in the countryside. In Korea, in Seoul, we have the very high-rise built housing. It's until 35, until 60 floor. We don't need this kind of the high-rising apartment in the countryside. But when you visited the countryside, you can see the many high-rise building with the environment is very some like the Chinese people who make the very good sensitive housing. Why? Because during the 20 years, the method, the culture, the life, the people who adapt to this kind of high-rise building, because it's practical. Because low building, we must spend the time for to continue to make his house. In country is very working very hard, and we spend the time is very fast. we don't have time the occupied the house. Yes, it's very different. The result is the very mega structure, but we try to cover by all the land by the green space. Yeah, and all the high-rise building in Korea, the complex, the residential in low part is all the facility complex for the equipment for the community. Now there is an obligation.
Thank you. Thank you very much. Antonio, there was a call earlier for a conversation about policy. It seemed from your presentation, legislation and sort of new statutory innovations are the way you are trying to address a design problem. Or is the design you're bringing forward to address a problem of low-cost housing? Is that how you see it? It's about architecture as policy, but not a policy about design, but a policy about liberating the way we think about land and the availability and the access to professional practice and methods of construction. Is that how?
What we try to show in our presentation is that, I mean, when we talk about housing, it's so many layers of discussion, and we talk about just one thing, like especially legislation and how we are helping and aiding with finance for Brazilian architects. So maybe next session we can show the examples we are financing with this 2% revenue. And I think it's the great thing we are. The design, architecture can solve the design, good architecture. And what we see here is a lot of examples of good quality architecture looking to the culture. But when we think about the problem that housing, to solve the problem, overcome the problem, I think I didn't get her name, but the land is really the question. And in Brazil, we have a lot of good legislation, like right to the city. It's in our constitution since 1988. But these legislations, they are not being, how can I say, executed. So it's always a very important exercise for us to talk with politicians, to tell them the importance of architecture for the health of people and for the city, the organization of the city. And about land trusts, we're discussing that in Brazil. We think it's a very important opportunity to change the paradigm of the social housing, because one of the problems we realize is the ownership. Once we do the project and everything, and when the person gets the private of the housing, so it changes a lot of things. Maybe the community can solve that better, and we have some good examples close to Brazil. We have in Uruguay, they use something like that. It's in their legislation about the community property of the land, and maybe I think we are starting to discuss that in Brazil, and maybe it's a way for us.
Excellent. That begins to return to that first question from Marianne about land ownership, which we will pick up. Just to wrap up, Izumi, you've worked in highly kind of managed construction economy of Japan, and then you've been kind of importing and exporting ideas from your long-standing relationship with Africa. That gives you a particular context. What do you take away from today?
Very generally speaking, social housing supply by social sector in Japan, as I told in my presentation, almost completed. But when it comes to the revitalization housing after the natural disasters, still social sectors are very positive and effective. That's the first situation in Japan. And the other one, as an architect, when I see that situation, I selected to go out because I had an experience to teach in Kenya, and I have good my ex-students, but now they are not students, but they are the very skilled architect to collaborate with. So I selected the international housing development through international collaboration, in my case with Kenya. And but one thing we must be careful. As I explained about our motto, seeds from Japan to be realized in Kenya. That means something very seeds we designed in Japan. But after going to Kenya with seed, we collaborate to be realized the seed with Kenyan people. So we will not bring the completed product or a completed design from Japan to Kenya, but we will just bring a seed. And that is the second point. So I think it's very particular in my case, but I feel very possibility housing development through international collaboration with other countries, between regions, between Japan and Africa, or Japan and Brazil, something like that.
Thank you. I'm just going to wrap up now. I was in India last week with Balkrishna Doshi, who got the gold medal. It was quite interesting because he has a very particular perception of the project. And we have the project, it's the project called Designing and Making Something. And that's the life of that project. And the life after that project is real life taking over. And in the modern world, with low carbon design and retrofit and recycling and avoiding demolition, that could be hundreds of years. And then there's a project before, which is infrastructure and allowing the housing to come forward. Whether that infrastructure is an existing infrastructure of a historical city or a new infrastructure of a new city. And interestingly, in terms of design, as an architect, his favourite project is a place called Aranya, where he designed 50 sample houses that were constructed, but the rest of the city was simply an urban infrastructure and a simple core of services to allow people to adapt over time. And in a sense that we know that's what happens with architecture, yet we always design our own closed loop system. And what he was really saying is, we are this tiny fragment in the history of a project, and the real project is the world beforehand that defines the opportunity, which might mean architects moving upstream and becoming clients and administrators and devising laws about land or finance, and then downstream actually allowing, recognizing that we are creating the kind of framework for people to take over. And when people take over, I think it was Luca Busi said, when he looked at PESAC, life is always right. Actually, that's not a failure of architecture. People taking over and adapting and working with buildings is actually the history of architecture. I think it's been extraordinary to have an audience online, extraordinary here. I'd like to thank the speakers, the panelists, you, the audience here and online. I'd like to thank Azlina and Emmanuel who put this together. It's actually, you managed to pull it off technically, so well done. And the team here at COAM, it is no mean feat. So thank you all very much for staying with us for 1 hour, 54 minutes. I think drinks are being served. Thank you all very much. And I do hope those who are at home and online will have large quantities of alcohol of their own. Very nice to see you. Bye. Bye.